Hey guys, Coach Pop here. Thanks for joining me for the video cast. I wanted to do a quick video to explain this concept of periodization and how that affects the way we tell the story of history. So, if you think about it, history is just a narrative. That's a word you probably have learned in your English class. Narrative just means it's a story. And like all stories, you've got to divide it up into certain parts. In order to tell the story, we have to divide it into different periods. That's the term we use in history. If you think of a novel, you've got chapters. If you've got a play, you've got like scenes and acts and so on. Periods are how we divide history up. But the question is, how do we do that? Well, the way historians do this is they look for key turning points. You may recall David Christian uses the term threshold moments, but again, he's placing the history of humanity in the larger context of the history of the universe. And so the way he does this, he's looking for moments of increasing complexity throughout the universe, including those moments that involve humans. Now that's the way he does it for his story, but as we'll see, that is not the way everybody else does it. So the question then becomes, how do you decide where these turning points are? How do you decide the dividing line where one period ends and another one starts? And it turns out it's really complicated. Historians absolutely do not agree on where we should draw the lines between the different periods when we tell that. Now, as I go through this, and as we go through the rest of the year, I want you to notice where those lines are drawn from different sources. Just notice and pay attention and see what you notice is different about it. But one thing that is going to be prevalent throughout, whoever's periodization scheme we're looking at, that the closer we get to now, the time periods become smaller. It appears as though complexity is increasing as we go through time. The pace of change is quickening, in other words. That's an idea we'll come back to repeatedly throughout the course. Right now, though, what I'd like you to do is to take a look at the periodization chart. It's on the back of your Spice T chart that you got in class if you were here yesterday. You'll notice there's a focus question at the top. At the end of this video, please make sure to answer those questions before you come to class. But here's a look at the chart real quickly. But what I want you to notice, first of all, is David Christian on the left, the guy that invented big history, he divides human history, the part involving humans, into three major eras. But then in the middle column, you'll see he subdivides those into what he calls subordinate eras. Then on the right, we've got the table of contents for the most popular textbook in college level world history classes. So here's what I want you to notice. You're comparing the way Christian and Stearns divides history into periods, and then how does that affect the way that they're telling the story? So the first thing you'll notice if you're looking at that chart, the major units in Christian on the far left sort of corresponds to, major eras correspond to the units in the textbook by David or Peter Stearns. So there's a sort of correlation there in terms of one's a textbook, and so we use units. How many turning points are there though? If you notice for David Christian, there's two turning points, three eras, and six units, so five turning points for Peter Stearns. In other words, they're not dividing it up the same. If you look at the middle column, the way that Christian subdivides the major eras are what he calls subordinate eras, and those roughly correspond to chapters in Stearns. In other words, chapters in units are kind of like subordinate eras in major eras. All right, why do we need to know all of that? Because look at how they are organized. If you look at the subordinate eras in the middle column, um, the way David Christian is telling the story if you just follow along, go from top to bottom in the subordinate eras, you're going to notice something that is different besides just the dates, the way Stearns is telling the story. Here's what you should have noticed. The way Christian tells the story in the subordinate eras, the way he divides things up, it's chronological. Quickly scan down and you'll notice each subordinate era begins when the last one ends. On the other hand, if you go from top to bottom, with the exception maybe of Unit 1, but definitely in Unit 2 and Unit 3, and also subsequent ones, I didn't give you everything for the second semester textbook, but the way that Stearns is telling the story, it's based on geography. In other words, Stearns is telling the story, he's taking a period and he's telling you about different parts of the world inside that period. Then he moves on to the next period telling you about different parts. Please make sure you understand this because this is going to have a consequence for how we do things in this particular class. Christian, because of the way he organizes his periods, it's chronological. In Stearns, it's geographical. Now, there's another issue to consider here that is the dates. What are the three dates they have in common? Now, there's one really biggie, but if you would, please pause and just scan through them and maybe on your sheet just underline or circle. There's three dates that they agree are turning points of some sort. They may not be major ones, but in one case, it is a major one. They do agree, in other words, that there are certain turning points that are relevant. But if you notice, most of them, they have very different ideas about when history should be divided into periods. If you look on the far left in the major eras for David Christian, you'll notice the agrarian era, the era of acceleration, he calls it. The dates are given to you in relative time, and can you convert those into approximate dates? In other words, fill in the blank there. What is the date circa 10,000 years ago, and what's the date circa 270,000 years ago? I would point out that this textbook, or I'm sorry, David Christian's book, just go from 220 to figure the second one of those dates. I'm sorry, 2020, not 220. All right, so here's the deal. If you will turn to the back of your binder now, the way the College Board divides it up, they use something called key concepts. So here's the first thing that you need to know. College Board determines all AP content, but that's not exactly the way that I do things. I'll come to that in just a moment. But if you look on the back of your binder, what you're going to notice is the way the College Board does it, they divide it up into 6 periods. So in that sense, they're similar to the way Stearns did it, but not the way that Christian did it. But if you look more closely, the dates are not exactly the same. So even though Stearns has 6 periods, College Board has 6 periods, if you look closely, there's a date or two, I can't remember now, I know there's one at least, that are the same, but they disagree on when exactly those turning points happened. That is significant. Another thing to notice in the College Board on the key concepts, the way they tell the story is very, very different. Whereas Christian is telling the story chronologically, Stearns is telling the story geographically. The way the College Board is doing it is thematically. If you look, there's key concepts for each time period, and those key concepts are associated with one or perhaps two, maybe even three themes. But so the way they tell that is thematically. Again, how you divide history into periods, periodization, is going to affect the way that you tell the story of history. If you have a moment, go through and sort of figure out which ones go with which. But in the interest of time, I want to draw your attention to something here. You got a set of highlighters if you were in class yesterday, and you might want to go back over these because even though I copied it on a color photocopier, they didn't quite turn out the same. But here's what you need to notice even if you don't redo it. If you look at the key concepts there, each is associated with a color. So you'll notice period 0 doesn't have a color. I'll talk more about that in class tomorrow. The ancient era, what the College Board calls period 1, is in orange. If you would take your orange highlighter and go over just the part that says period 1, the ancient era, because it looks sort of yellow on the photocopy. In a similar fashion, make sure you've got go over period 2, that is yellow. Post-classical period is green. On yours, the late agrarian, early modern one is blue. That's really, really dark on the photocopy, though. Purple is the modern era, and the contemporary era is red, but for our purposes, we don't have a red highlighter, so that'll be pink. I am aware pink is not red, but it's the closest thing that I could get for you in a set. So here's what I want you to notice, though. Those time periods, the colors associated with each time period also corresponds to the tabs in your binder. Now, if you flip over to the front of your binder, you will also see that there's a course overview. That's APOP. That's the way I do it. Now, I want you to understand something. This is an AP class. I'm sort of following what the College Board does. In fact, we do more than the College Board says we need to, but I reorganize it. So APOP is like my spin on AP. And here's why that is a kind of important detail. I need you to understand how I'm going to do it. First of all, if you look on the front, units correspond to the College Board's eras, as they call them, except for Unit 1, which is combining the ancient and the classical together. All right. The chapters, I call them, even though it's not a textbook, I'm still calling them chapters. Um, there's one a week. There's a quiz every single week that there is a chapter, just so you know. And it's always on Friday unless there's a problem with scheduling. But you'll also notice there's these things called interludes in there. Interludes are like, we got a little something else to add, but there's not a quiz on it because usually there's going to be a test over the whole unit. Here's the big thing I want you to notice on the front of your binder, the course overview there. How are they organized? Because here's the trick. I am taking a little bit from Christian, I'm taking a little bit from Stearns, and I'm taking a little bit from the College Board in the way that I am telling the story. In other words, I'm using time. At some points, I'm going to tell the story chronologically. I'm using space. At some points, I'm going to tell it geographically. And I'm also using themes. At other points, I'm going to do it thematically. Now, you've got the, again, same issue with the colors kind of not working out the same, but with your highlighters, here's the schedule basically for the year. First semester's on the left, second semester's on the right. Now, there's a couple of things I want you to notice here. First, Unit 5 is red in your binder, but highlight that in pink, just the contemporary period, but then quickly scan through that. And what you will notice is in that unit, I'm more or less telling the story chronologically. All right. But in purple above that, you have Unit 4, the modern period. And if you scan through that, you may notice, it might be tough to detect right now, I'm telling the story thematically. Like for that time period, I'm talking about politics, I'm talking about economics, I'm talking about culture. And those are the themes that organize the way that I tell the story. If you go back to the first semester, Unit 3, which is blue, I'll talk about why there's two names there much later on. In that one, I'm also telling the story thematically. But go to the post-classical period, the green one, and if you scan through the chapter titles, you'll notice I'm telling the story geographically. I'm going from region to region to region. And then Unit 1, which has no color yet, it will, but we'll get to that in a couple of weeks. That one, I'm essentially telling it a little bit chronologically and a little bit thematically. Okay. So again, the big idea here is periodization is how you divide it up and it affects the way you tell your story. Finally, I want to draw your attention to Schoology. The folders that you will see, even though Unit 2 and 3, there's nothing in there. Unit 1 is black. They totally changed the color palette. They used to match your tabs and your divider and your highlighter perfectly. Now they won't let me do that on Schoology. So we're in Unit 1 right now. You get in there, Unit 1, there's Chapter 1. And you will notice it matches up perfectly with the table of contents, other than the colors are a little skewed. Again, that's all jacked up. Inside Chapter 1, it looks like this. Now, here's what you're going to notice. It's always in chronological order, like your homework assignments, your classwork. Everything is listed in there in the order in which it happens. I point this out because if you miss a day, everything that you need is in Schoology. You are still responsible. If you want to get a stamp for the thing that's due on Wednesday and you weren't in class on Tuesday, you have to do what's in Schoology to get the stamp. Now, doesn't mean that you can't do it by the end of the week and still get full credit. But if you want the stamp, if you want the bonus, you have to do it whether you're there or not. And then show it to me when you come back. All right, so here's the thing. I tried to keep this under 15 minutes, but I didn't quite get there. Please make sure that you go back to the top of the periodization chart. In your own words, what do you think periodization is and why is it an important concept of the study of world history? Also be aware tomorrow when you come in, you're going to get assigned seats. Again, these are only for days that we're taking a test or a quiz. And if there's a sub, almost never are we there. The quiz is tomorrow, no matter what. I don't care if you weren't there some days. What do you do? First of all, in Schoology, you'll notice there's a link to terms in Quizlet and StudyMate, which is a version that the WCS approves. Definitely study your Spice T chart and then just sort of glance over your homework. I'm not saying you need to study that necessarily. Guys, the quiz is not going to be hard. It's the process. I want you to start to learn the process, how things are done in this class. It's not going to damage your grade. I promise you that. However, be aware, there's going to be homework over the week. Every single week, there's over the weekend. There's homework over the weekend. You'll get a packet that has all of your homework for next week on Friday. Thank you so much for your attention. I appreciate you guys, and I'll see you in class.